Hello, everyone! Welcome to the Chaotic Wholesome Talk Show. You should all be able to hear everyone this time. Chat, you're amazing. If something is not working, please yell. We appreciate your helping us out. I'm Kay. I'm your host. I got two folks here with me today. Over here is my regular co-host, David. Say hi, David.
Hi.
And over here, we have I didn't ask this. Are you cool with me using your name? Or are we just calling you Old DM?
No, you can use my first name. It's fine.
Okay. This is Rich. Rich is the amazing DM that ran the Mothership game over on Todd Moonbounce's channel, who's hanging out in chat, and I got to play a very creepy android. He put up with my BS very well, and is running an Urban Shadows game, which David and I are. I don't know. Are we mucking up your plans yet?
Give it
There
time.
are no plans. It's emergent storytelling, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There are no
Look at that
plans.
transition.
Right?
Look at that professional transition right there. So, Richard, thank you for joining us. We're going to do our quick little stuff. You can find us here, me and David, here every Tuesday talking about this stuff. I believe in June, my Starfinder game will officially be out. You can find Richard and I on Sunday the 1st over at Tales from the Tavern. We're going to be talking about the Mothership game we ran, which is amazing, and I can't wait. And then on goodness, when is the 14th? Saturday the 14th, I'm going to be playtesting Emerald Templars, D'Angela's game, who we just had on last week. So there's going to be cool stuff. And hopefully, as Other Side Steve is hanging out next month, I'll have another thing you'll be able to watch. But we'll figure that out soon. David, anything else you're doing? Anything I missed?
I am working on the stuff for you at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Our forever ongoing. Rich, what do you have going on? What can you plug?
So I obviously am hanging out at Todd's bounce house
Mhm.
quite a bit. We have a few things that we're cooking in the background that we can't talk about just yet. But Todd has a full calendar of amazing things over at the bounce house. So
Always.
Todd
Always.
Moonbounce's Twitch channel is popping all the time. Definitely head over there. I'm repping for Todd here with my shirt right now. And then on Twitter, you can find me at iCrusaderBlog is the name, that old DM. And you can definitely hit me up. I can also be found in Kay's amazing Discord, as well as a tiny little one that I have over in the corner of the metaverse myself, where we're organizing that Urban Shadows campaign, where we might be bringing on some additional folks as well. That could get quite interesting.
Come meet my truly disaster chaotic fae.
Ooh, yes. Ooh, yeah. No, Kinley, very spicy.
He brings me joy and everyone else stress. So,
Yes.
we are here to discuss emergent storytelling, which is your specialty. So, Rich, before we go too far, you've got some street cred.
Yeah,
Tell us,
I've done some stuff.
yeah, like
Um,
cuz you have street cred, but not necessarily you're not the most well-known. Let's be honest, you're not the most well-known in the space yet. So, give us some of your history. Let us know, like, you know what you're talking about. Tell us just why you know what you're talking.
Why I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, uh, I actually took a very long hiatus from Twitter up until a few months ago when I came back to help push the Dead Planet project. And Todd is really the person that sort of brought me into
Thank you, Todd.
streaming and bringing my storytelling talents and loves and passion to the forefront. But yeah, I'm not a young guy as my moniker that old DM will partake. But my TTRPG experiences start as early as third grade with the world's oldest Dungeons and Dragons game. With some exposure to advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but it all really starts coming alive for me in the mid to late 80s with pretty much everything that TSR and FASA did. So I played it all. Top Secret. I played BattleTech. I played Shadowrun. I played Cyberpunk 2020 when it was new. So I came up in that space. By the 90s, though, my tastes had sort of changed, and with the emerging of White Wolf's dominance in the marketplace at the time, uh, and sort of the fading out of second edition kind of D&D at that time, we moved into that. And so for most of the 90s, I spent a lot of time in the World of Darkness, 100-person LARP games that went on for years, as well as a lot of tabletop gaming.
A
Uh,
100-person LARP just blows my mind.
Right?
yep,
Right.
three times a month for 2.5 years straight. And
It
what
really
was that?
puts in perspective getting 4 people to sit down at a table at the same time once a month.
Well, also, when you start thinking about plots, that kind of arcing where you have no control over 100 people running around in character for 3 or 4 hours, it really, really changes everything about you. And that's when I started to experiment with different ideas that would eventually become sort of the core philosophy of emergent storytelling that I have. And we're going to talk about TTRPGs as philosophy in a minute, but one of the things that I began to learn during that period was you really had to prepare situations, right?
Mm.
Plots were something you looked at post game, right? What's coming out of this game? What threads are left to be resolved, sort of post game? Because when you're in the middle of something like that, you are just pushing a timetable and creating tension as much as possible to keep as many people occupied as you can. Um, and then so then third edition launches, sort of towards the end of that period, and that's when I first started getting involved in writing and publishing adventures. I started creating friendships through email, exchanging with people like JD Weicker, who worked on the Star Wars D20 game. There things like that, and then Google Plus arrives in my life some years later, and I begin, becoming a part of that conversation and everything that's going on with PBTA and Vincent Meguey Baker and narrative storytelling and the beginning of the indie space. And I spent a lot of time, listening to the Gauntlet podcast. I played in the first Gauntlet Con and ran my first streaming games ever at Gauntlet Con 1. Was able to play Space Marine versus Moonicorn with Jason Cordova, and had just an incredible experience there. Played Katanas and Trenchcoats, which most people probably never heard of, with its game designer.
David's
Um,
just very
and
excited now, though. I watched that
Right?
perk up.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I was like, "Okay, I get
oh,
behind
katanas
this."
and trench coats. That's a whole thing. Um, and then really started to focus on my business life and my personal life. I'm an entrepreneur. I have an MBA. I have a BS in communications, which for an Irish kid is, my dad's worst joke. Because I'm an Irish kid with a BS in communications, and and now I'm, knocking on a doctorate. But I have loved tabletop RPGs and philosophy and game design for a very long time and tried to learn as much as possible. We're going to be talking about a bunch of resources that are out there that people may or may not know, that have helped form sort of the philosophy. But that's sort of me and my short and very low value impact on TTRPGs so
I mean,
far.
definitely not short,
Uh,
but very impressive.
Definitely not Low Valley.
yeah.
So, the TLDR of it is you've been doing this a hot minute. You've been
Mhm.
doing a lot of
Wow.
different things a hot minute for a lot of different people. Um, so most of us, I'm assuming most of the folks hanging out in chat, I don't mean to speak for everyone, but we come from the idea of you're the DM, you prep a session, you get your characters' backstories, you build a world, you stick the characters into the world, you do the session, you do damage control for how far the players went off the rail. And you approach storytelling very differently in a way that really, I think, broke David's brain when we were
Yes.
starting to discuss this. So, explain emergent storytelling to us like we're kindergartners.
Yeah.
Like your
Explain like
kindergarten.
I'm 5.
So I'm just going to make a brief history note here, right? That oral storytelling is the oldest version of storytelling that exists. And while stories have evolved over the centuries in a lot of different ways, and obviously we have, today screenwriting and television and video game experiences that I've sort of come across, TTRPGs have a connection to a very old concept of a person telling a story in a live format. And what's interesting about oral storytelling is you don't see the same thing happen. Like if you go see the same person tell the same story every season or every year, the story changes, it evolves. They change their prestige, they change their approach, they interact with the audience and perhaps change a character. As you know, it's a very interactive experience when you're listening to an oral storyteller. And for me, emergent storytelling in TTRPGs is trying to bring that kind of culture to the table where yeah, we're sitting down to explore Faerun or deal with the Sabbat in New York City in a World of Darkness game. But not everything's going to go bang, bang, bang. I may have 7 scenes or encounters prepped, but those things aren't necessarily going to happen exactly the way I conceived of them because A, tale as old as time, players never do what the DM expects them to do, right?
Mhm.
And 2, there's usually 3 to 5 of them. And when you get a group of people together and they're competing against one person, the group wins, generally speaking, right? So the DM's life as a competitive control freak is really destined to be a point of frustration in the first place because really great role players are going to show up and do really great role playing. And that's going to sandbag your story incredibly well. So emergent storytelling sort of leans into that concept and says, we're going to make an interactive experience here. We're going to tell his tale that none of us know how it turns out, and we're all going to be surprised and entertained and engaged, you know, in the moment, right? And we tried to bring a lot of that to the Dead Planet experience as well, and I think it worked really, really well on stream. And I think we told a really amazing story that, to considering that there's almost no plot prep and direction on the outside, is a really, really amazing thing. But one thing that emergent storytelling has that a lot of traditional TTRPGs don't necessarily involve themselves with is what I call mechanized genre emulation, right? And so this is the idea that there's something baked into the game that's going to push on the genre of the game to help bring it to the surface and engage on it, right? And that's very different than a game that has, you know, 40 pages of combat descriptions and 62 pages of monsters, you know, and a handful of maps at the back, right? Like that kind of game design is very different. And I personally struggle with
Mhm.
D&D 5. I played every version of D&D that exists. I played a ton of OSR games and uh, stories that don't surprise me at the table are just not interesting anymore, right? And that's sort of how I've kind of come up with this, um, because a lot of traditional TTRPGs have some wargaming space sharing, and they're very simulist in what they're trying to emulate, and that can be really awesome. But we live in the era of Netflix and episodic serial television and 20 movie franchises, right? I mean, we want to see amazing things at our tables today that maybe weren't even theoretically possible 20 years ago. And emergent storytelling helps mechanize or give us mechanics to bring that to life, right? And that's what I want to talk about.
Very cool. Yes, Ezekiel, Ezekiel's hanging out in chat. There is a petition for dungeon slimes to be renamed Roombas, dungeon Roombas. So,
I'm not gonna sign that. I'm not. Nope.
yes, so emergent storytelling. Tell us, like, because again, I know even just I kind of get it because I've done a lot of improv, right? And you're kind of like I've got the thing, and like
Mhm.
to me, the idea of that is, as a DM, is very stressful. But something I could probably do, and I could probably have a lot of fun with the right players. There's certain people where I'm like, I don't think I could do that with this person, but with the right group of people, I think it could be very fun. So, what does prepping for a session as for emergent storytelling look like? And then we can start talking about like the how-tos, because I think first people just need to fit their head around how does this even work.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do want to come back to the TTRPGs' philosophy in a minute,
Absolutely.
Kay, if we can. But
Absolutely.
just to
David,
go
make a
on,
note.
Already did.
because part of this, will track a little better with that framework as well. But when you're looking at prepping emergent storytelling, you're really looking at situations versus plots, and this is a very story game narrativist kind of idea that lives in huge spaces in the TTRPG community, where you don't prep. The Joker is going to steal this thing from this university, and then he's going to take it to a laboratory, and he's going to work on it for 3 weeks, and then he's going to take this weapon and he's going to release it into the city, right? If you carefully craft a very intricate story plot, and then you try to take it to a table, first of all, good luck getting everyone to follow exactly your marks. And second of all, good luck not story dumping in a villain monologue at the end to try and explain what the heck was going on in the first place, right? So, prepping situations is a way to deal with that before a game that allows you to be very flexible at the table. We know the Joker is going to steal this thing. We know he's going to try to do terrible things with it. And those terrible things are probably going to involve the mayor and, Commissioner Gordon and 2 or 3 people the Batman knows, right? Like, we know that that's going to happen, and the situation is enough to push tension and gameplay at the table. But you have to sort of be open ended about it. And my history with this idea, years ago, I tried to write it up, and I've talked to Todd a little bit about this. I had this idea called flashpoints, where basically you come up with just different things that are going to happen over the course of time. And then, when I was introduced to the Apocalypse World engine, the PBTA games, there's this thing called fronts that's exactly that. And fronts have evolved into clocks, and clocks are even more beautiful. It's the Joker's going to release this weapon on the city. Step 1 is he steals the weapon. What are steps 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7? I don't care, because I'm going to make them up as I go and tick the clock in front of the table so that they know whatever he's planning is going to happen soon, and we got to stop, right? And that's emergent storytelling, because the space that you live in at the table, exploring that scenario, is going to make great sessions, right? And so part of it is prepping situations ahead of time that have some kind of a tool that works for you, whether it's an index card with 9 beat points on it, or a physical clock with a beginning and an end, or a ton of other tools that are out there. There's a lot of TTRPG tools out there that allow you to prep situations and then track them without understanding a plot. And what's interesting is, I think I mentioned this to one of you previously. I love reading Paizo's Pathfinder adventure modules. I love reading them. And I read them, and I turn them into clocks, and I throw the book away. Right. And then I run them with whatever system is convenient in front of me, because they have a lot of great ideas in them that they're evocative and interesting and well written and articulated, and a lot of very interesting villains, and they have all the things that you need to make a great stew at your table. But I personally like the story to emerge at the table without, having to follow each chapter of this thing. And if you get lost,
I feel like a lot of DMs are kind of doing a little bit of this in tiny little bite-sized portions accidentally, right? Like, there's all sorts of posts on Twitter about, like, yeah, I had a plan where, like, they were going to camp overnight, and a random event, they heard wolves howling. And then someone's like, is it a full moon? And I'm like, maybe.
Now it
and they're
is.
like, it's werewolves. And DM's like, looking for a werewolf stat block. Like, I feel like a lot of people are doing this anyway, because players, it's not necessarily that they come up with better ideas than the DM, but they will come up with more random, more diverse, more like ideas that they are more excited by or scared of than the DM will.
Well, absolutely, and they come up with things that they're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which the first rule of engagement is talk about what the other person wants to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's a very, very simple communication tactic that we employ in role playing games that I don't think enough people spend time about, which is and when we were playing Urban Shadows, Urban Shadows character creation process is basically a set of prompts. What's your history with this? How long have you been in the city? For the Fae, it's like, why did you leave your homeland, right? The answers to those questions are the fodder for all of the fiction you're going to create in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But all you really need are the questions. And then you just let the story emerge from the questions, from the prompts.
Um, so e- you and I both, well, actually all three of us now have significant experience, not just homebrewing, but building out our own worlds. Um, and when I started mine and my approach, because uh, a trap that I see DMs fall into over and over again is they come up with this big elaborate story, like you said, and then um, the players come in and blow it all up, and then the DM gets mad about it, and it's like, well, that's that's what uh, collaborative storytelling is about. Is they have to add stuff, um, and Kay can attest that my approach is to offer a whole bunch of things and then let the players decide which direction they want to go. And that was a big sort of breakthrough shift for me. But I also, in my discussions with you and in playing Urban Shadows, um, I find that as a DM, I'm still trapped in the sort of like traditional storytelling thing, and the concept of emergent storytelling, it 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 feels like
The white whale.
tightrope walking without a net.
Oh, that's very much what it is. And if you want to break yourself of that fear, the best thing you can do is run OSR games where all you have is a bunch of random tables, right? There is no plot, right? It's you know, four people go into a dungeon, and there's no dungeon, there's no map, there's just random, encounter tables, and see what happens from there, right? Um, and I think because for me there was a period of time where I did that, where I was running games where you would show up and you randomly generate everything on the fly and you just see what you can weave out of it, right? And that gives you the chops later to take an amazing character like Kai and an amazing character like Nyx and an amazing character like Captain Petty and weave them into, a story with, with Lace Coley and the Yellow King and a sprinkle of Carcosa, you know, on top of a complete module, right? A completely architected module. And you're sort of doing it on the fly. Um, Candace and I have talked a little bit about Apocalypse World engine games now as she's prepping Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is coming in June. It's going to be amazing. If everyone needs to be there, it's absolutely incredible.
Absolutely.
We
But
are actively recruiting. Go over to Todd Moonbounce on Twitter if you would like to play. It's a charity stream, 4 of them across the month of June, benefiting the Trevor Project. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait. Sorry, continue.
no, and when you're running one shots and when you're running Apocalypse World engine games, in the beginning, session 0, the beginning is the scariest part because you don't know the answers to any of those prompts, right? You don't know the answers to any of these questions, and they can say anything. They can say, well, I left my homeland because I stole a nuclear weapon from, the Winter Queen, Mab, and I'm on the run from this, and they've been hunting me every day for the rest of my life, right? Okay, that's a whole lot of story that you just dropped in the middle of, part 2 of 10 of a questionnaire, right? And really great. I mean, honestly, does it? If someone comes to you with a character like that, do you need a plot? Like they just gave you
Right.
everything that you need. You don't even really need a system. You just need a way to decide if they succeed or fail. which
And
is can be as simple as you roll a d6.
and I've
Um,
definitely been involved in campaigns and streams and games where like the plot got in the way of the awesome things that the characters were doing, or the mechanics wouldn't let the story happen. And sorry, I'm in Manhattan. It's very loud here. If I weren't speaking, my noise gate would catch that. Um, but like there have been times where I'm just like, can like thinking to a GM, can you stop what you're doing and just let us do not see the magic that's happening here? Let us. And I really enjoy, and it's no tea, no shade to anything they've written, but when you get, as Todd said in chat, when you get that magic of that group of players together and there's that spark happening, it is truly lightning in a bottle and nothing you can orchestrate. And if all your GM is doing is going like, can we stop role playing now? Can we get back to the plot?
mhm. Yep. And there's also a flip side of that, right? That I want to touch on too, which is there are a lot of people that have like system warfare conversations. This system's better than that system, right? A lot of those I've found over the years are really only partially about the system advantages and disadvantages, and they're more about the people at the table. Because if you get 3 or 4 incredible individuals together, it doesn't even matter what rules you have if you just let them run, right? And I think Critical Role's success is a huge part of that, right? The skill of the improv actors matters more than the fact that they're playing 5e, which started out as a Pathfinder game, right? If I understand the history
It was
correctly,
originally
right?
Pathfinder, and then they switched to 5e for the stream, yeah. And I
Yeah,
don't think Wizards of the Coast could be any happier.
Right.
yeah, and D&D is, I mean, it was my gateway. I've played every version of the game, um, and I have amazing nostalgic memories and loves of everything. And Kay, you and I have talked about Curse of Strahd a lot, and Ravenloft is a very special place in my heart because it came out, when I was a teenager, when the box set for Second E came out, and we played the crap out of that. Right? I mean, it's amazing. I love gothic horror probably more than almost anything, which is the reason why I ended up playing Vampire the Masquerade in the first place. And that there's a lot of amazing components in there, and it's an amazing sandbox story, but it also has a lot of problems with it, right? There's a lot of problematic storytelling in that, and you do have to kind of be aware. But the point I was trying to make is you get great people, system doesn't matter. You get people who are learning or trying to evolve or maybe don't entirely know the kind of game they want, and system starts to matter a whole hell of a lot.
Right.
And that's why having mechanics built into the game that helps push the story forward or helps mechanize some kind of genre emulation is really really important. And but also having a good foundation. And one thing we're talking about, two of his books probably on this, but Robin Laws has a book called Laws of Good Game Mastering that's 40 pages, 35 pages. It's not even a really big book, but it's dense, and it kind of gives you everything that you need to know about the kind of players that are out there, the kinds of games you can run, and the things you should be looking for in system and product for your table, right? Because what matters most is the people that you're spending time with,
Yep.
and telling that great story, right? That's the most important thing. And that book is sort of a foundational piece that I think has gotten lost a little bit to the ethers of time. Um, and it's a great book to give a new GM or a young table and say, hey, how do we fit into this, and what does that mean about our fun, and and try and push on that a lot.
Yeah. David and I spend a lot of time when we're building out our modules and the things that we're pulling together about like, okay, this is what I want to play. What do other people want to play? What's in this for other people?
Right.
No, absolutely. And so when you're prepping, so I'm going to jump into that conversation about philosophy. So I'm a big philosophy buff, and philosophy is about taking competing ideas and arguing them out, trying to figure out what relevancy any position has, right? This is the cornerstone really of civilization is the idea of philosophy.
Mhm.
And tabletop RPGs have a myriad of different philosophies out there. And none of them are right or wrong or better than anyone else's, but understanding what your philosophy is at a table, not only as a game master, but also as a player, can be really, really important. And so, a very simple lens that I use to just kind of evaluate anything that I come across is technique, theory, and tactics. Basically, how is this thing doing a thing, right? How does it do a thing? What's the theory of why it does a thing, which is probably a thing missing from most TTRPG books
Mhm.
ever published, right? Is the why, but then the tactics part, the when do I use this thing, right? When do you use a clock? When do you call for a save? When do you give a fatigue level
Mm.
in 5e, right? Like, when is it appropriate? When is it interesting? And you can't, I don't believe you can learn how to be a great game master by just playing one system. I don't even think it's possible. Like, I think that you have to be exposed to evolving concepts, whether it's multi editions of the same game or different games,
Mhm.
to try and figure out what else is possible. Because the game designer space out there is really small, and there's a lot of ideas that cycle around, and they're pushing on these philosophical ideas constantly in their game design, saying, "Hey, well, so I just watched The Northman this weekend, right?"
Mhm.
And as soon as I walked out of the theater, I'm like, what system could I use to emulate that kind of game? How do you make an art house Viking game come to life at a table? What pieces would I need, right? And those are the questions that there are a lot of people in the space and a lot of people on Twitter that we talk to every day are asking constantly. Hey, I have this idea for a game.
Mhm.
Um, the greatest thing you can do is throw it on paper and take it to a table, right? And hopefully you have a table of people that'll trust you, but then understand, like, what are the techniques I'm leveraging? Like, what is it that I want this thing to do?
Mm.
Why do I want it to do that? And why does it work? And then how much of that do I have to utilize? And so with plots versus situations, right, the technique is to not prepare the ends so that you can go wherever the story takes you, to wherever the table takes you, right? And the why is so that you don't suffocate the RP,
Right.
right? So you give the character collaboration an opportunity to steer it, because maybe someone puts a bullet in the Joker's head before he pulls out his plan. That's not going to happen in a Batman comic, but it'll probably happen at your table.
Maybe they start helping the Joker.
Maybe they join ranks with the Joker. Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
And if you allow the story to emerge naturally, then you can tell a great story. And then tactically is knowing when to push the mechanics forward and when to pull them back.
Mhm.
I'll give a perfect example of that that we did in Dead Planet, because towards the end, we took away damage rolls entirely, right?
Mhm.
In the end, everything just did wound damage because the stakes were high and it was visceral. And we just took that thing and I just chucked it out because we didn't want the combat to slow down,
Mhm.
the horror aspect of the game, right? That's, part of the thing. And so letting the situations play out as fast and as RP centric as possible was what we were after.
And that ended great.
Everything was fine.
It was all
I
fine.
mean, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, it's my moniker,
I
right?
did predict it.
And I think you did. And actually, if no one has gone back and listened to the first episode, I just recently went back and re-listened to the first episode after the run because it's on Spotify now. Todd's stuff is on
Mhm.
Spotify. If you don't know that, it's on Spotify.
Dead
I
Planet,
don't
that
have the
is.
link to that yet. Well, no, all of it.
Yeah.
Dead Planet's there. Monster Hunters Club is dropping there. Um, there's a lot of cool stuff there. Todd,
Oh,
throw a link in the chat because I don't know the link to the Spotify off the top of my head. Um, but you know that it's really fantastic to watch the arcs. I messaged everyone the other day because Candace has this great line early in the thing where she won't even remember Kai's name. It's like, oh, I'll learn the name eventually, right? I'll learn it. And then, Candace is the one practically in tears at the end of the story when, Kai is facing the inevitable challenges that Kai is facing. And that arc is just beautiful. It's just unbelievable. And it's not something that was planned. It was something that emerged because we had room to move, right?
Yeah. People let me be weird. And when you let me be weird, I let weird things happen. And it just gets really fun.
Absolutely.
But yes, that was... Mothership was a time. I'm excited to see what we get up to in Urban Shadows. Also, chat, if you have questions about emergent storytelling, about philosophies, about the things that we're diving into, throw it out. Because, you know, David, you all are at a little bit of a disadvantage because David and I have had the chance to talk about some of this, and like I've had time to suss some of this out. So like, ask questions. If something didn't make sense or you're excited for more, we're gonna have... Rich came just prepared with materials. But yeah, like a little bit about leaning into what you're talking about let the characters' stories shine. Like David and I, when we did Godplane, I spent a lot of time going over character backgrounds and like reading, even if not everyone called out what their character's like main thing was, but I asked, like, I'm like, make your character a big deal in this world. Tell me their history. And then I spent a lot of time piecing out, like, I think this will tie in here, I think this person will do this. And there were a couple that surprised me. But, you know, reading those background stories, you can start to get a really good feel for characters. And with Godplane, I had an ending for 3 of the 4 characters already in mind. And I kind of knew how I was going to get there. But with this system, I think even just having gotten that and not having built everything out exactly the way we did, we probably could have still gotten to those same endings.
So something about Kay's ability, not just as a DM, but as a DM on stream. Kay is great at a lot of things, but 2 things in particular are relevant here. 1, she will plan an episode and go, okay, this isn't enough, this is 2.5 hours. So I need to add a little bit more. Or she'll go, oh, this is gonna run for 3.5, 4 hours, I'm gonna trim this. Without really being planned, or no, without heavy modification, every episode of Godplane took precisely as long as Kay envisioned it. The other thing is, when we were first doing it, we were like, okay, so we have this whole arc set up. We have all these different planes that they're going to visit. How long is the series going to be? And she looked at me and she said, oh, it's going to be 8, but with RP, it's going to be 10. And then we did not discuss it for the next like 6 weeks. And turns out we got to episode 8. We got done with episode 8. We're doing the prep work for the following week, and she's like, "Yep, this week is gonna be the penultimate, and then the following week is going to be the last one." And boom, she landed the plane in 10 episodes on the dot, and it was really incredible because I had no part in that. She was just like, "Nope, this is what we're doing. This is what fits."
You get a feel for it. And that was just less me GMing a bunch of games, me watching a bunch of streamed games and seeing, and yeah, I'm gonna loop this back to you real quick, Rich, but like running a home game and running a streamed game are very different. And if you want to learn how to run a streamed game, not necessarily Critical Role is what you should be watching. Watch anything B. Dave Walters does. And that will teach you how to run a really good streamed game. Bronze Girl with Shakar is also really, really good. Anything, the Battle for Beyond is really good. There's a definite pacing to streamed games that you can start to pick up on and start to emulate. And I'm not sure when I started picking it up, but I don't know, David, I think you will confirm. I also just passively absorb a lot of things without meaning to.
Well, you love media, right, Kay? I mean, you love games and movies and stories, and I mean, you
I like
absorb
storytelling.
stories.
Yeah. And I am
comic books, TV shows, anime,
a few
D&D, Pokemon, like media. Yes, storytelling.
Oh, learning how a comic book is written will really, really change you as a writer.
Maybe that's
Do you think
I
writing?
was I was a colorist on comics, so I worked in comics for a while. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, because I mean, think about it. You got to tell something episodically concrete in a certain number of pages with a specific variable of panels, and the page locations matter, right? So if you want a big splashy screen, you have to put it at a very particular beat in the story, and uh, that that's beyond me. I'm gonna be honest. I know how it's done. I have never done it, and it's completely beyond me. But it's a really interesting technique. David and I were talking pre-stream a little bit about screenwriting and beats and Save the Cat, and there's several things out there. I started incorporating 3 and 5 act model points into my sessions in my home games probably 15-20 years ago, and over time you do get a feel for it. Running it on stream was interesting because I spent a lot of time watching that clock, right? And guessing how much we can do to land at a particular point. Because Kay will tell you sometimes Rich had a specific end scene I was aiming for in Dead Planet, and
That's
then
what you
other
got to do.
times,
You got to build that tension
yep.
like that. Again, home games and stream games are very different because home game,
Mhm.
anytime you say we'll end there, everyone's like, oh, I can't wait. But for an audience, you got to kind of sweeten that pot a little bit, keep them coming back.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're sitting down, if your home game takes, a 3 hour session or a 4 hour session, generally speaking, if that's how much steam your table has, it's pretty easy to slice that up into either thirds or fifths and sort of begin to figure out, okay, by an hour and 15 minutes, I want to be done with this encounter and I want to be entering this part of what I had planned, right? Or I want to be pushing this clock forward, or I want them to meet this NPC that I prepared, or whatever. And that's part of what's happening at the table. But another thing that happens at the table that teaches you about pacing is understanding when to go to dice, when not to go to dice, which is the second big point that I think I prepped in the things is dice rolls and stakes, right? Understanding at the table, when do you go to dice, when do you call for dice, and what are the that stakes or the outcomes of that dice roll. And I'll give you all two very, very simple tricks. If you haven't heard it, is just absolutely phenomenal. One is if you know it feels right to go to dice, but you don't know what goes wrong, but you know what goes right. In there, ask the table as they're picking up the table, what goes right? And if you want to be a really interesting GM, ask another player like, okay, if David fails his roll, what goes wrong? What might go wrong? Right. And first of all, you get a very high level of engagement out of that kind of play culture. But also it gives you some inspiration point. This is one of the reasons why I like the Apocalypse World engine and Blades in the Dark, the Forge in the Dark system, is because the moves tell you kind of what happens, right? They push you, oh, it needs to be a downbeat, or you need to add a complication, or they get most of what they want, but something goes bad, or someone notices them, right? Uh, and and so as a GM, it's very easy to navigate that space when you know that the move is going to help you, right? It's also kind of interesting. A lot of those moves have the player choosing the consequences, right? You have 5 options, you get to pick 4, or you have 4 options and you get to pick 3, right? These are the 3 things that happen. That thing you don't choose doesn't happen. And so it's a very, very clear from a narrative standpoint what that looks like. And Kay, we explored that a little bit in one of the great moves on Sunday with Urban Shadows, and it was very clear. Oh well, I want this to happen. I want this to happen. I want this to happen. The other thing doesn't matter. And so it was also okay for the thing that didn't matter to not have stakes in that particular moment in the fiction. But we also knew these 3 things did happen, and that told us something about what was going to happen in the next beat. right? And that's something that, you know, a D20 based skill roll just doesn't give you, right? It as a piece of tech, it just doesn't give it to you.
Right. I really enjoy, especially when it's two players interacting, so like player v player interaction. So in a game that I'm going to be in, that is not anywhere yet, I'm playing someone who's a little bit shady. The term quantifier the character has already been thrown around, because that's just how this character functions, and has history with one of the characters, and none of the others like really know them. So everyone's rolling like perception checks, insight checks against my character, because that's what when they're trying to figure out like, do I trust this person? Whereas when the person that I had history with, you know, asked a question, I'm like, don't even roll it. You know my character, so you know. And then at one point, another character was like, I'm gonna make an insight on this, and I'm like, don't even roll it, because my character is, for once, not being deceptive. And it's a lot of fun, like, as a player, to kind of take some control about that, to deliberately fail a thing, to be like, I want you to know, you know, you can choose if your character believes this or not, but you as a player need to know that your character knows, and that is true, and do you believe it? I don't know, I'm not playing your character. But I really enjoy, especially as a DM, like, do you want to roll it, or do you just want to, like, how much do you want to give away? And when you can give people that freedom, it's really rewarding to just be like, you know, yes, this is my character, and this is what they choose to do. As opposed to being like, okay, well, roll, like, and again, there's a place for it, but it's like, you know, roll either deception or just like fake roll, and we don't have to know which one it is. When you can just say like, don't even roll it. No, you know. No, you know their tells because you know them well enough. That's right to me.
No, it's super juicy, and it is, you know, player agency is a whole other part of emergent storytelling that sort of sits under that umbrella, which is, you know, you never want to tell a player their character does, feels, or whatever, has a reaction to X, unless there's a mechanic baked into the game that you're pushing on, right? And some games have that, like stress in Mothership, right? The GM gives out stress. It's a thing that happens, right? And they call for panic rolls. It's a thing that happens. And so you that's part of the gameplay. That's part of the experience. It's a mechanized emulation of genre, right? And that's fine. But if you gave someone a level of fatigue because they were stressed out in, you know, a 5e game because they were listening to a story about something that triggered their past, like, that might feel really weird. I can remember running a 5e game where I let people make saving throws as resistances to things, right? Like arrows were flying at them, and I'm like, okay, make a dex saving throw, see if you get hit. They're like, but that's not how that works. Why not?
Just yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Like, it's
Maybe
very
the
simple
force is with you
mechanic,
today.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That was part of my challenge with Vampire the Masquerade, is I felt like, and I understand why that system takes a lot of agency away from you, but I'm also like, I feel like half these roles I'm not in control of my character.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a thing is happening to you in that game. Like you're experiencing your character in a very mechanized fashion, and you know, sometimes again, so we spend years running very large Vampire the Masquerade LARPs, and you know, the emails or side conversations that would happen in the weeks between a game about characters and their journal entries and diaries, and like everyone's experiencing this from their own POV. Like they're living in their character for 4 hours in a physical environment, and then they're spending 2 weeks thinking about everything their character's been thinking about ever since then, right? We get a very, very personal level of connection to role playing, and it crosses a lot of boundaries, right? Psychological and otherwise. And you know, when a character dies, and I'll give you a perfect example. So I was at one point I was playing a narrator character, so I was playing like an NPC character in a LARP, and the GM of the game knew that I was supposed to try to kill the new prince of the city, and I've been there as basically a plant, and I was there for like 5 games, making connections, interacting with people, gaining the trust of people, et cetera, et cetera. And then he comes up to me one day and says, "Okay, you have to go kill the prince now." Right? At the same time, the prince is being fed information that I'm going to try to kill them. And then the prince summons me with presence, and I fail the rolls. So I do end up in the presence uh, of the new prince with the intention of killing them, but I'm there against my will. And then the NPC gets murdered, right? And
Mm.
that was, part of the point of what we were doing. But to be put in a moment where it's like, okay, now is when you have to execute your plan,
Mm-hmm.
NPC, go do it, right? Is one level of stress, but then watching the machinations of other people try to stop you or interfere or influence it in a real
Mm-hmm.
time, you know, can really rob you of agency, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
the way I would have personally architected that thing, but we were playing a part and we were doing a thing, and that was the thing we were there to do, and it was a hell of a lot of fun, right?
Yeah. We did something similar in Godplane, except we put people in a situation that they knew had happened before, but they were living through the bodies of these people. So they had a certain amount of player agency, but things were going to happen with or without them. But also, we gave them an out because it wasn't them. And it was very interesting to see how into that moment it was, and how much certain characters then started questioning what they were capable of. So player agency is really interesting, especially when you can really creatively play with it. I really enjoy being like, okay, you're in a situation. Are you going to do the thing? Or are you going to refuse? Especially if maybe there aren't consequences.
I mentioned this
Leverage.
before on stream, but I had a situation with a player where I set them up so that they had to. I set up this whole family complication where I had to eventually go back home to marry somebody for political reasons. And the idea was they were going to turn them down and continue doing what they were doing, and therein lies conflict. And he offhandedly said, well, what if I said, screw it, I'm going home to do this? Then I'd be like, well, I'd have a whole lot more writing to do, but let's go. Um, and I think that, like Kay mentioned earlier, that's sort of the microcosm of emergent storytelling, when there needs to be more of an embrace in um, something wider. But like, speaking of a whole lot of writing, and I was talking to Kay about this over the weekend, how I wrote and then threw out half to 3/4 and then rewrote this big sort of scene for our home game that's coming up. Um, and uh, but tell us how organization and notes and everything is different when it comes to emergent storytelling,
Yeah.
because like, I wrote full on dialogue.
So one of the things that I was shocked about when I started exploring, particularly Apocalypse World engine games, was how little information you really needed in order to make the game work, but how critical each word of that information was. I'm gonna give you a couple examples. So a drive, a lot of these NPCs are basically a name, what they do, or what their background is, and then a drive. What is it the thing they're trying to do is? Are they trying to find their sister? Are they trying to overthrow a government? What is the one line of information that they're trying desperately to do, right? And with just that information, it can keep you grounded in a character because you know the purpose. Why is this foil being put in the story to drive like, this is what they're driving. This is what they're doing. Now, I personally also like to put two other things on every character that I can, every NPC character that I can. One is I like to cast them, right? So who would be playing this if it's a made-for-TV movie or a blockbuster movie? Because it gives me a visual tone, right? And sometimes that gives me a voice to go with, right? So if I'm being Jack Palance from City Slickers, if I know that's who this character is, I know exactly how to do that at the table, right? I'm Jack
I mean,
Palance from City Slickers.
that's a deep cut for people not born before
You're right.
for
Well, I'm
young
Christian
millennials
Bale
and Gen
Batman.
Z.
Right, I'm Christian Bale Batman in the cowl, right? I know I'm
Right.
talking with marbles and a gravelly voice, right? I know that's what I'm doing.
David
Um,
loves it when I cast my characters.
Yes.
but doing it for NPCs will allow you as a game master to have variation, right? And the thing is that most game masters generally find two, three, four voices that they can naturally do at a table, right? And one of them is almost always the same voice for gender opposite representation, right? So if you're a guy pretending to be a girl or a girl pretending to be a guy, you generally don't have a lot of range in those voices. But if you start saying, "Oh, I'm going to be Katie Holmes in this scenario," versus uh, Reba McEntire, all of a sudden the performance changes, right? And you're like, "Oh, okay." So and you get a visualization, and always use people that you are fans of because passion informs performance
Hmm.
always, right? So people that you enjoy watching are people that you should cast in your games, right? And you'll find
In
out that you
every sense
have
of the word. Sorry. Just- that works for
yes
streams, for people playing at your table, as well as you playing a character.
at home,
Continue.
yeah.
I apologize.
And uh um and then the other thing that I like to do besides casting is definitely give them a visual token, right? So if you were writing this in a novel, right? How do they walk? What do they wear? What is one or two things about them? Do they have a patch? Do they have, a really big gold earring? Um, uh, does Blackbeard always have his right arm naked in his clothes? No matter what, to show off his New Zealand tattoos, right? These kind of evocative points are really, really important things to remember. And so if you have those five things at a table, you generally don't need stats. And so I'm also going to do the thing that a lot of people are going to hate, but I love to do it. And that's that you really only need 8 stat blocks, generally speaking. You need the fast person, you need the tough person, you need the strong person, you need the magical person, you know. And if you have those stats in front of you, you can just use them over and over again, right? It's like, oh, this goon is the fast guy, I'm using these stats, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this works way better in non-level class-based systems than it does in, particularly Pathfinder, for example, because the math people at your table are going to go, everybody we fight has the same armor class as the people we were fighting 5 sessions ago, but you've leveled them. And that's
I
all you've done, right?
I know multiple GMs whom I very much admire, especially once you get up to level 20 play, where they're like, every monster you fight is a Trask stat block. I might reskin it, so if it's this, it's got a fire breath instead of that, but like, it's a Trask stat block. Like, there's only so many level 20 things you get, so this is what we do.
Well, actually, one of the things I love about 5e is the idea of those villain powers, right? It is this idea that basically when you sit down to make your villain, that's the only section you need to worry about. Because they're all roughly the same. Maybe you swap strength and dex or, whatever in the character, but do you really need it to be anything more than that? And the answer to that should be no, you don't need it to be anything more than that, because how that person functions, speaks, acts, just the descriptive, evocative elements of how they fight, talk, do whatever, should be the thing that lives in the space of the table, right? That's the interesting bit, not whether or not they have, you know, 2 more armor points than the last guy you fought, right? David?
So, a couple things.
Buckle
One,
up. Here we go.
um, there are they're basically like two main archetypes. Like you're either fighting people or you're fighting monsters. And Kay has watched me furiously build characters on fastcharacter.com, like just randomly generating like, oh well, I need a level 10 rogue like right now. But a tip I got about monsters, especially um to avoid something repetitive, and for people who have like a deep familiarity with the monster blocks or the monster stat blocks and whatnot, and even people who actively avoid metagaming, they're still like you still want to keep them on their toes. You still want to give them a fresh experience. And so like I said, just a very deep, like down at the bottom of an old Reddit post I saw, they said, well, give them like no give them different statuses. So, is that creature hungry? Is that creature diseased? Is that creature poisoned? Is it in decay? Is it is that creature in control of itself? And all of these things can affect its stats, and you can tweak things. Well, it's hungry, so it's a little bit faster, but it has a little bit less hit points. And there are all sorts of little things that you can do to sort of keep your players on their toes. Like, uh, I like Roxy got talk with animals, and then tried to talk to a spider, and the spider couldn't talk to her, and Roxy and the rest of the party still don't know why. Like, they still don't know what type of creature it was that they were dealing with. And when it comes to characters, a note for DMs. I'm guilty of this too, where you have a character and you're like, oh man, this character's cool, and then you spend like a solid like 30-45 seconds describing how cool this character. The tip I picked up from Rich is, one, if it's a character that you want your players to be interested in, ask them how they look. Still blows my mind. And I was just like, why haven't I been doing this whole time? But the other thing is, like Rich was saying, you only need one or two things. Like,
Oh,
there
4
are
impromptu things. Yep.
right. And so, there are players in my game where I'll go, oh, that's so and so, and they're like, hold up, I heard that name from where. Oh, it's the guy that used to be a pit fighter that has scars on his arms. I'm like, yeah, that guy. And it's like, boom, boom. Those are two details. They don't know how tall he is. They don't know what his skin tone is like. They don't know what his favorite purse designer is. Like, they don't have any of that. They just
need a
need
hook.
like a couple things. And you don't necessarily need to drill in super deep about both what a character looks like what an NPC looks like, and what what they're all about. You just need to give them enough whereby it sticks in the player's brain, and then you can move on.
And be careful, because you never know what your players are going to latch onto. If you, I'm gonna be careful to not completely spoil, but campaign 2 of Critical Role, there is a character that, when obviously the book for the campaign 2 book was written way before a lot of this was done, and stat blocks and all this was done. So it went printing, and everyone was shocked because a character showed up, and everyone went, that character's attractive, they're weird in a cool way, they're kind of not into us, and we're kind of into the fact that they're not into us, and they now belong to us. And the character's just hyper-focused on this character. And when the book came out, that character was lawful evil, and had the potential to be the big bad of the campaign. And the entire cast just went, nope, they're ours, and was no longer the big bad of the campaign.
Right. Yep.
You never know what your players are going to grab onto. So emergent storytelling is really good for...
And there's 2 ways this can go. So one is, the more information you tell about the the character on screen or in the game, probably the more it needs a complete stat block, right? But if it's the guy who pickpockets you in the festival and you're chasing him down and they're just going to put an arrow in the back of his head, do you really need a full stat block for that? No, probably not, right?
What
And
did we do, David, when
so
you were like, wait a minute, hold up. I gotta roll a stat block for this guy right now. He's like 6 levels above you. Why are you people picking a fight?
Yeah. Yeah, more than once, Kay's party has tried to punch above their weight class, and I'm like, to the point where I've started saying to someone, "You guys could start this, but you're not going to win."
To be fair, only once was it me, and that only happened because of a nat 1 on a wisdom roll.
Yes.
Otherwise, I've been very good.
Are either one of you familiar with the 13th Age game system that
No.
Jonathan Tweet and Rob Heinso created? So they, of course, worked on 4th edition. They worked on a bunch of shit, but they worked on 4th edition. And then after sort of the demise of 4th edition, they wrote a game called 13th Age. And 13th Age is sort of 4E conceptually perfected as a game. And it's chock full of Jonathan's rules and Rob's rules for basically like, this is how I run the game and this is how I run the game. And I don't remember which is which, but one of them has a rule in the game that they run. It's a table rule of theirs for a long time that made it into the print, which is that PCs can only be killed by named NPCs, right? So if you're fighting 3 random ogres and you guys go to 0 hit points, nobody dies. Right, you will wake up somewhere else in a cage, whatever, right? But if you pick a fight with Fizbin, the wizard from Dragonlance, and he blasts you, and you die, right? And it's a really interesting separation of play styles that happens. And that game actually has a bunch of really interesting tech in it. And Cam Banks and I have chatted a little bit on Twitter about this, but that game ruined me on skill-less in D20 games forever. Like, because there are no skills in the game. Every character has 3 backgrounds, and the backgrounds have levels on them just like skills. And as you go, you sink more points into them as you level up. You can even add new backgrounds as your character evolves. And so if your background is former paladin of the silver arm, whenever you're doing something, if you can leverage that fictionally, you can use that plus your stat to do it as a skill. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, paladin of the silver arm doesn't know how to pick locks, right? Then you don't get to use that. And it's a very fictional idea that asks the question, do you really need skill checks? And there are clearly games and tables that need and want skill checks. Yeah. And I'm not trying to propose you don't need them, but for me, it's like, if I could have backgrounds instead of skills, I would probably have that. I think Todd and I have talked about this with Star Wars 5e at one point too. I'm like, why don't we just get rid of the entire skill list mess of Star Wars 5e and just have backgrounds? Because it would make the game fly a whole lot faster.
I talked to a DM at the Complete Strategist, which is right near me. And he said he has a rule about how players will never die simply because of a bad dice roll. He will never let his players die just because, like, if you deliberately do something foolish, but if it's just a string of bad luck, he won't ever die. We see you, Todd. But he says, but also that doesn't mean, it's not narrative and it's not consequence free. So in one game, he had a group of characters that just kept dying. And death started showing up and being like, okay, I guess you're cool. And like, they convinced death to not take them. But after that happened enough times, death started hanging around them. And all the NPCs could see death.
Ooh-wee, that's spicy.
That was real spicy. And, Valise is going to have a real hard time if that starts happening.
I mean, there's
Absolutely.
a reason that Valise has been touched by a god, and it's not because he's righteous. It's because he always finds himself on the ground bleeding.
That's our home game reference, I apologize.
Careful whose attention you get, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you get the attention of the wrong thing, it can really change a game.
Um,
So go ahead, David.
yeah, I was just gonna say, so like, tell us more about um, notes and how you approach uh, uh, sort of between session.
Yep.
And Kay and I are gonna have like an entire episode on what a DM and a player should do between sessions. Um,
Oh, we haven't even
but
talked about blue booking yet
We haven't
either.
even gone
And
into
I
that
want,
right,
yet. That
I
I
wanted to
also
get into
we're,
that.
we after this, like, because clearly we're not done with you. We got more. We're not done
yeah,
with your bag of
right,
tricks. I'm taking more out. We want to hit
right.
a bunch of. We want you to drop a bunch of your references. But there's also, we like to get a little bit spicy up in here, and I know that you and Todd have both been pretty open about some things that you have learned in playing games with myself and some of the other amazing guests we've had on here. And I'd love to dip our toes into that as kind of before our closing thought. But yes, talk about between sessions. What do you expect from your players? What do you do? And what do you do if your players aren't? Because a lot of this kind of emergent storytelling really relies on people being there and committed, and not everyone does that. So talk about that.
This is correct. Are we
Please.
talking about somebody we know? No, we're not
Yeah,
going to name
some of us,
right? No, okay.
some of us
Um,
get the notes to the DM like 2 hours before the session starts. But
and some
no
people's
one, no
notes are
one.
post-its, and other people's notes are double-spaced 4,000
Right.
word treatises. K. Purcell.
I don't know. I give it TLDR. I make it shorter, but
Mhm.
I know you want ammo to use against me, and I like it when GMs hurt me. So
Yep. So post-session is probably where I do the most amount of prep. So post-session notes are really, really important, and I'm a worksheet addicted person. I love worksheets. I love things that will make me do a thing. This probably won't show up on my camera. So Levi, I'm blanking on his last name.
Got it.
I'm gonna have to look it up. Yeah. So there's an individual who has tabletop stuff on Drive Through RPG who's really amazing. I think it's Cornlinson. And he has a thing called Tabletop Situations. And it's a set of worksheets for all kinds of different things. And one of his worksheets is one I love to use for Urban Shadows, and it has 4 factions, all with arrows pointing at each other. And basically, what it does is it has you map out who the factions are, who the main people are, and what they want from each other. And so, no matter how you do it, all 4 corners of your faction sheet are pointed at everybody. And there's even a spot for the opposing diagonal spots. Oh, we lost.
yeah,
We lost
there he
Jamie.
is. There he is.
Oh,
Welcome back.
God. Oof.
Okay. David was so entranced that his entire internet connection was
Right.
robbed by what I was saying. He's like, "Who is this guy?" Anyway, and it's called Long Knives. This particular worksheet's called the Long Knives, right? And the idea is these are the long-term things that potentially could play out. And so post-session, I like to look for tools like that. I have a whole bunch of them that I like. The main thing is to make notes, and then I like mind maps. So I like taking a blank piece of paper and using circles, squares, triangles, et cetera, and highlighters to sort of denote all the things that went on. So who's fighting with who has allegiances, who's in debt to who, these sorts of things. Now, the really bad thing is about me, once I write those, I can basically shred them and it won't matter anymore because it's up here. Once I commit it to paper, it's up here. And that's an advantage that I have that a lot of other people don't have. But when you map this stuff out, it gives you sort of time to breathe. I'm notorious for assigning homework to my players in homebrew games, where I expect them to answer questions, tell you what you're doing, what are you after. We're going to do a 3-day time jump. Where do you go? What do you do? And games like Blades in the Dark that have like a full downtime component baked into their game, I really love for this because you can either do it between games, you can do it at the beginning or end of sessions. You can do it all kinds of different ways to keep the game going. And so post session noting is really important. The Lazy DM has the easiest, most powerful tool that you can ever do, which is get yourself one of those oversized index cards. Okay. At the beginning of a campaign, you write your character, class, and heritage information at the top. Then on the front page, the front of it, you take notes on like what that character is into and whatever as you play. And you just keep updating that note card. On the back is where you plan future things you're going to do to that character. Plots
It's
you
really
want to push
interesting.
on.
It's really interesting that you present this because um, the one signature move that I have as a dungeon master is scrambling for the notes that I wrote. Because and so one of the things I've really given a lot of thought to and worked a lot on the past few weeks is organization of.
Oh no. I think his internet's being very difficult.
He's just being very suspenseful.
Yes.
While we're waiting for David to cycle back, I will tell you that the other purpose of those index cards, which is incredibly valuable, and David's going to miss out on this tip right now,
Oh, I
is
think he's back.
you can use them as bookmarks. You can use them as bookmarks at the table, right? And so you always have those index cards with you, and you can use them as bookmarks in the module or whatever.
Yes. David, then look at this look of fascination. He's so impressed by you. It's amazing. Amazing. Okay, well, we might
So
have
before
to
we go into your
plan.
topic,
Yes.
yep. But so before we go into your exit topic, just a couple of things. So
Yes,
about
please.
beats and stories. So we name dropped "Save the Cat" by Blake Snyder, which is an incredible read for anybody that wants to understand how stories work.
One second. I'm gonna try to. Oh, okay. We'll see. We'll see if he stays. Hi.
Back?
Welcome back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I felt like you were about to go out because your captions stopped working.
I'm having a time on my computer anyway. But please continue.
So we're wrapping up some source material here. Some tools.
Yep. So as great as Blake Snyder's Save the Cat is, I will give you one better by the aforementioned Robin Laws called Hamlet's Hit Points. Hamlet's Hit Points is renowned because it takes sort of that same concept of story arcing, but applies it to TTRPGs. It is specifically understanding how stories work for tabletop gaming. And it's a fascinating thing. I could probably talk about it for an hour. But the thing is, if you're interested in trying to figure out how story maps work, this is a functional system of which there's a website. You can create your own. You can go read about all kinds of famous stories and understand downbeats and upbeats, et cetera, et cetera. And then I have David hooked on John Wick's Play Dirty, which there are two volumes, but he's only in the first one. And so if you want a really interesting account of a GM being very collaborative and very emergent in their style, who he's a little renowned for, being a character murdering terrible DM that pulls on all the threads, all the things that I hope that Jen thinks about me. That's a really good read, right? That's a really, really good read.
I know you're not into 5e, but I really need you to watch some B. Dave Walters because that is exactly his reputation, and I think you'll appreciate it.
I really struggle with 5e, and I struggle with Savage Worlds quite a bit. So Savage Worlds, I will say, is the most fun you can have with dice in a TTRPG, because the exploding dice mechanics in Savage Worlds is literally the most fun dice rolling that I can remember having in 20 years. but it's just a hair too simulist in its combat. And I can rip a lot. I think I do. Yeah, Kay, I told you this, right? Like with 5e, like if I could take the entire combat section of 5e and just
Yeah.
chuck it out the window, um,
Yeah.
with the action economy, I'd be good. 5e would be great if you just get rid of the action economy.
So B Dave runs the Black Dice Society, which is a mostly theater of the mind live stream. And while there is combat, and you'll probably just want to skip the combat altogether, but like it is very let the players do their thing. I think you'll.
Well, Lazy DM and Chatty DM both have huge theater of the mind 5e stuff that's out there. You know, theater of the mind I think is really amazing. I'm really enamored. There's this thing going around over the last year and a half where they take Lazy Susans and they turn them into dungeon maps. Have you seen this? With the circles? Okay, I'll have to find the video link and send it to you guys. But basically, there's a guy who is doing theater of the mind style combat in 5e with a Lazy Susan. And you still put the miniatures on there and you can turn it and everything, but basically it's not an exact representation of a dungeon or an encounter, but it's enough for you to understand zone distances.
Gotcha.
And it's a really convenient concept, and I want to figure out how to bring it into Foundry so bad. I'm like, how do I replicate this in Foundry? Todd, we need to talk about this. Because it would be an amazing way to have miniatures in a theater of the mind descriptive manner. It's really functional. I think it would work really good for Mothership too, actually, which if there's one thing I missed about what we did in Dead Planet, it was not having some kind of range miniature manipulation. Like I think it would have really added to the end of the game. But I think it's about it before you start leveling your big guns at me, Kay.
Yeah. So, David, I know you're having troubles. You let us know if you want to hop in, but we're gonna power through with you coming in and out. Thank you for sticking around as much as you can. So David and I have spent a lot of time talking about, and a lot of what we talk about on this show has been, you know, intersectionality and representation and all of these things that a lot of people don't feel are a problem in TTRPGs because they haven't come up against it. And in your time, even your short time doing streams and talking with us, and like it's really cool to work with you because you hit a concept, you hit on something and you're like, that's really cool, I want to build it, I want to fix it. And actually, one of the things I really admire about you is you've come up against a couple things where you kind of went like, oh, I would like to fix it, but I don't think actually I'm the one who can fix it.
At my place. Yep, at my place.
So is there any of this that you would be willing to share with us? Or warnings for others?
Yeah, so look, I mean, you know, I'm a, you know, late 40s white male who grew up in TTRPGs. It's not an anomaly, right? It's a very common thing to run into in the space. And, you know, even in the LARPing that we did, even with 100 people, you know, minority and inclusivity were very minor, right? Very, very minor in my retrospect. And I think that is, well, first of all, it's an unfortunate byproduct of the world, but also just letting people be comfortable, right? And people who want to tell great stories at tables and are into other people's stories, you know, should be able to be there. But creating a safe space is really, really an important challenge for anyone right now. And we were casting for Dead Planet, and hopefully Todd's okay with sharing the components of the story. But you know, we had a lot of opportunities for the kind of cast that we could pull together, and to have 3 incredibly talented women with, you know, some racial representation there with Candace and Jen as well. It was an amazing opportunity to like just let talent be talent, right, and lean into that. And you know, there's a lot of people in the Twitter sphere that I would love to game with, but you know, having the white male GM isn't always the right option for everything. And Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a perfect example of that. I would cut off parts of my fingers to be involved in that project on the stream.
Mm.
But this, it's not for me. It's not about me. And as much as I would love, to be a part of that, like I'll be on the back end. I will,
Mhm.
assist in all of these different ways. I'll help anybody who doesn't understand Apocalypse World run great games, or whatever needs to happen. Like I want to make myself available because the stories that can be told and should be told um, are about more than hi David are about more than just cis white dudes, right?
Mhm.
Gathering treasure and becoming famous in their imaginary worlds, right? And personal storytelling and the stories that people want to explore are really, really important,
Mhm.
and believe me, in my younger days, I had the token girlfriends that would be at the table that would want to go on the shopping expeditions and all of these things, and um, certainly not proud or okay with, in retrospect, some of the commentary that would happen from some of the regular, the good old boys, as it were, at the table about we don't have time for this. We're trying to level up, like exploring a fantasy world
Mm.
is about so much more than you know how many goblins did I kill this week,
Mm.
right? And I think it's a really important thing for people to understand, and I have had the joy of evolving
Mm.
uh a lot over the past few months by having perspectives of people that were willing to be honest with me about what they thought and answer legitimate questions. um but I think making space for that is a beautiful and amazing thing that we got to find a way, right? We got to find a better way to have these conversations and give this space. um and I do feel so the Commonwealth is a perfect example. So there was this idea during the Dead Planet run to turn the Commonwealth into a anti-patriarchy, inclusivist society, right? And that we should write that up and put that on Kickstarter, and we should build that. And guess who the person who shouldn't write that is? The guy who thought of it, right? The guy who thought of, hey, we should do this, and this would be a great platform. Like I can't be the person that writes this. And even if I, prepare a project like that, like just to have my name on it would be particularly disrupting its entire purpose,
Mm.
right? And I think people need to do that, right? And if there's a group of people out there that are fans of Dead Planet that want to turn that into a project, talk to Todd, talk to and and we'll give you all our ideas and you can run with them,
You will
right?
get all of the support, I
Um,
promise you.
yeah, yep, yeah, and but it's not a project that
Yeah.
can't be organized. You can't even go to Twitter and say, "Hey, I want to do this really great thing." Why are you doing it, right? Like, why are you doing it is legitimately the first question that should be asked,
Mhm.
and there's no a available good answer to it.
And again, I mean, we had this discussion, you started talking about it and you were really excited. And I'm like, I also can't write it because I'm not going to lie. So much of my success in my life has been fueled by spite. So much of it has been people saying, you can't do that. There's not space for you here. And I was like, well, I'm going to go do it.
Challenge.
Yeah, exactly. I am really happy to do the challenge accepted. And that doesn't mean I don't get really, and I'm like, I don't know how to play a character in a world where that's not a thing I can reach for.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not.
We're talking specifically about the patriarchy, in case
Yeah,
and no one's keeping up.
yeah, yeah.
Is the original idea is the patriarchy's been abolished, and Kay and Candace and Jen are like, what the hell are you talking about? What does that even look
Right.
like?
Yeah. I can't, I
It's
can't
beyond
fit,
beyond this.
I can't fit my head around that. I don't know how that works. How do I function as a person in that space? I don't know because I've been so shaped by it.
And even if I had an opinion on it, to take keyboard to blank paper and write it, what?
Yep.
But I also think, you know, even if you are a person who is not from a minority background, you can do a lot to help kind of this inclusivity and making space for everyone, not just through casting, but also through emergent storytelling. You talk a lot about let the person tell you, what does this person look like, right? And it's probably not going to be the person you normally reach for. If you're talking to someone of color, they might start reaching for things of their history. We look at Tales from the Radiant Citadel is about to come out for 5e, and it is an adventure book, levels 1 through 12, written all by Black and brown people. And it reaches into these very cool non-Eurocentric traditions and settings. And even me, as a painfully white person, I am so excited to play in this game because I want to get out of Eurocentric fantasy. I want to get into these spaces and learn about these cultures in a way that's immersive, and I can be a respectful guest. And so, is there any learnings or advice or thoughts you have for when someone in an emergent storytelling pulls you into a situation that maybe you weren't prepared for around that? How do you approach these conversations?
So, first of all, playing with intent is really important, right? And so everyone needs to know what we're aiming for, what we're okay with, and consent needs to be very clearly, defined in games. I'm a big fan of the X card because all I gotta do is this. You know what? Hey, just stop, right? And part of the understanding, of the X card is that we're gonna fade to black, we're gonna rewind, we're gonna do whatever we need to do, but we're gonna get the thing off screen without explanation, right? And respecting the fun. This goes back to the very beginning when we're talking about the laws of good game mastering, right? Understanding why your players are showing up at the table, what they want, what's a good time to them is really, really important. But also making sure, as the table boss, as the GM, that you need to check in and make sure everyone's okay and give them a tool to say, hey, well, you know what? Not today, right? And sometimes it can be real easy to step onto something or specifically forget something. And it happened to us in Dead Planet, actually, with Kai and the Gaunt Hounds, right? I had not specifically described them as dog-like, but they were certainly canine-esque, in their representation of the thing. And there's a player that
I like dogs.
has
I like them.
does not have a good time with that, and yet ended up being the person that the thing grabbed a hold of its leg, right? And in retrospect, it was, it's a thing in the module, right? I didn't put it in the module, but I also didn't look at it and go, oh, this is a dog. It's like, no, it's a four-legged bestial version of whatever the hell the Gaunt are, right? And they're called hounds because they bay and whatever, which is dog-like, but not necessarily a dog. And then we have a player who has potentially triggering situation, and so if Kay felt unfortunate or triggered on that, right? The X card is a tool for say, hey, remember when can we make them less dog-like? Oh yeah, absolutely, right? And explanations are not necessary, right? It's not stop the game and then unpack that thing. It's have respect for the fun and say, oh, can we quickly move past this so that we don't have to deal with this, right? And on a different day, a higher stress day, Kay might have had a more visceral reaction. Because guess what? People aren't the same people every time they show up.
Yeah. You don't know what's happened to a person earlier that day, earlier that week.
A person never steps in the same river twice.
I'm also going to say, you can come at anything with all of the best intent, but good intent doesn't mean no harm. So you can come in, this has certainly happened to me where I'm like, I came up with this cool thing. I've researched this thing. This is a thing that's important to this character, and it's out of this person's background, and I'm going to do a thing to honor it. And I did not honor it. I thought I was. I did not. And so Xing out of it and then touching base after, give people time to cool down. Sometimes they need to. And being able to say, hey, I know I messed up. Do you have the energy to tell me how? I just want you to know I'm sorry. Not my intent. I'm very sorry. And that can make a big difference. But just be aware that, and I say this every time we talk about these subjects, I'm going to say it again, you are going to mess up. Everyone is going to mess this up. So don't let it end your anything, right? You'll work past it, learn from it, get better, but go into it understanding you are going to mess up, you are going to cause harm. You can fix that harm. You can be better going forward. But nothing is ever going to be smooth, perfect, flawless, completely 100% inoffensive to every single person. It's not possible.
Yep, it's not possible.
And
I had an old mentor that used to say about parenting, right? All parents will mess up their kids. It's just a question of how, right? Like there's no, you're not getting through the parenting experience without leaving a mark on your child psychologically, right? Hopefully it's a good mark, or it's a mark that benefits everything, right? But maybe it's not. David.
an old adage is no child emerges from childhood unscathed, and that really extends to what we've learned about social interaction as a whole. Like, whether it be on the schoolyard or at a workplace or with your loved ones, you learn over time, like the third rails that you don't step on. And you do that by blundering into things and then going whoops and apologizing. And it's that whoops, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that again, is what respect looks like. Because and that's the problem with like shit posters on the internet. Like, you don't know who you're talking to. There's no it, and so you can say what you want and not care about how they feel. Um, but
Well, written
when
communication as a whole is very poorly evolved,
Yes.
from our roots, right? It's just bad. It's just bad. It's not good
Especially
enough.
in 280 characters. No, you're not going to have a good conversation in 280 characters.
right, but we all have that internalized ability to recognize and then extend that empathy and that understanding, um, and towards people that we respect. And so part of our goal should be expanding the circle of people we extend that respect to.
Professionally, I've spent almost 30 years in leadership roles, in management roles, and one of the advantages to being a good leader, or at least a leader who understands leadership, is you do have to stop and seek understanding before being understood, right? It is a core component, right? It's you gotta get it, right? Like, whoa, wait, that's not what I meant. Why did you interpret this way, right? And sometimes the answer is clearly articulated, and other times it's chock full of emotion and psychological blockages, right? And you got to know how to navigate that. And remember, most of the time you're playing with people that you're friends with,
Right.
Yeah.
and they showed up to have a good time, right? That's the
Right.
core element of shared storytelling, is to have a really good time exploring stories. And I'll take a role-playing session over the best TV show in the world any night, because I get to be alive in it, right? It's a pure passionate obsession. And not that I don't enjoy turning on a good TV show or a movie here and there, or an amazing podcast, or listening to an audiobook, or whether it's fiction or nonfiction, but if I have an opportunity to get together with a bunch of people and build a story at the table, that's what I'm doing today.
So, I think that's a good place to start wrapping this up. I have a whole list of books and resources that we're going to put in the description of the VOD. If you would like to tweet them, we will be happy to retweet them along with this VOD. Richard, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. We're clearly not done with you. You're coming back for more because I feel we barely got there. David, thank you for sticking with us despite your difficulties.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah.
But we did not ask Rich the most important question.
Uh-oh.
What is your favorite Pokemon?
So, thankfully I do know something about Pokemon. Otherwise, I'd be grossly unprepared for this. But I do have also something for
Are you going to
Gengar.
come at us with something?
I like Gengar a lot, actually. Okay, it's something that I can represent.
Mhm.
And purple is actually a color that I adore because it's royalty and elegance and all of these amazing things. But and I'm blanking on the name
Oh boy.
of the he's a steel lion from
Solego?
I have a yes. So the only Pokemon deck I have is a deck built around that
I'm personally a
I've
Lunala
devastated.
fan, but I'll give you Solego.
Luckily, we have a Pokemon expert here who knows all 1,000 or 10,000, however many they are now.
Yep. And so that is probably, I mean, as far as actual money invested in Pokemon, that's my Pokemon.
Todd asked, how do you get
build a
Pikachu
really
on
awesome-
a bus? And I'm excited to hear the punchline of this.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the
Right?
punchline.
This is painful. This waiting is bad. While we wait for that answer, final thoughts, Rich.
I mean, this was a blast. You guys are amazing. Anybody who doesn't watch this show, please come back and watch it all the time. Kay and David are fantastic. Looking forward to a lot more Urban Shadows. Hopefully, Urban Shadows will manifest in a stream at some point. The second edition is still sort of behind schedule, and so I already shared with everyone I'm not interested in putting it on You Pokemon.
You Pokemon.
That's what he said.
Pain.
You Pokemon.
Pain. Yeah.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
Thanks, Todd.
You Pokemon.
Pain. Absolute pain.
That stopped me cold, Todd. Good job.
Yeah.
But hopefully after next Sunday, Todd and I will be able to talk about a thing. What's a thing that Todd's excited about? He hasn't heard all my notes on it. Todd, I have pages of notes on the idea that we need to talk about.
He talks about being like low prep, and then he's like,
yeah, pages. Well, it's pages because I write big and I have terrible handwriting, and it's actually scribbles, right? Not as eloquent as Kay Purcell.
No, Kay cannot write. Her handwriting is complete garbage. So they just fill pages and pages and pages of Google Docs and then just sketches. It's like Google Docs and then sketches. It's a problem. Oh goodness, are we just evolving? We gotta go because this is just evolving into Pokemon jokes. Rich, anything else you can promote before we run away? Before we're just Pokemon jokes all in the chat.
Yeah, so Todd Moonbounce's major project right now is the Monster Hunters Club, which has its finale episode this Friday at twitch.tv. It's incredible. It's 80s magic. Just go check it out. And Candace is amazing. Hopefully she runs a Savage Worlds game for me at some point. And then
our joint Thirsty Sword Lesbians coming up. So please go to Todd's Twitter, find the thing. We desperately want people from the LGBTQIA community. We want representation for femme and non-binary folk. So if you fit that, please apply. Tag your favorite performer you'd like to see. We are getting some awesome people. I'm so excited. David, do you want to pimp this one or do you want me to go?
You do
talk about the show? Okay. David and I are here every Tuesday. The next 2 Tuesdays are going to be a little bit shorter episodes because my mom is in town and Mama demands her time. But we're here every Tuesday talking about this. If you have someone that you want to see come on, or if you want to come and talk about tabletop things, please ping us. We have actually got some guests lined up, but we're always looking
Yep.
for more. Sunday, we're gonna be at Tales from the Tavern talking about Mothership. I'm going to be doing Emerald Templars playtest on the 14th, and more things are coming soon. And in June, I will finally be able to let you all see, hopefully June, we think June, give you a glimpse of my Starfinder character and what chaos I am causing there, because it's a good time, y'all. So that wraps it up. Chat, thank you so much. iCrusader blog on Twitter if you have more questions, if you want references. I know Rich would love to talk to you about it. And again, if you have topics you'd like us to cover, anything like that, please hit us up. We are here. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. We're going to flip over to the end screen, and then we're going to find someone awesome to raid. So thank you again for hanging out. Everyone say bye, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.